Good evening and welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the regular meeting of council for Wednesday, April 5th, 2017, and it's just 7:01 p.m. And before I move to the adoption of the agenda, I'd like to do two minor items just to start our evening off. First, I'd like to welcome officially our new Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Andrew Yates, who's sitting on my right, your left. We're really glad to see him here. And Director of Finance and Corporate Services, Doug Stewart, is glad to see him here as well. Andrew comes most recently from Ucluelet, but he's also worked as the Chief Administrative Officer in Queen Charlotte City when it first became a municipality. And one of our real interest in having him come here was that experience he had in starting a municipality and building things up, because our rebuilding over the last 2 years we're finding increasingly is a very substantive foundational kind of work. So that's similar to what he's done before. And he comes with some private sector experience as well, a little over a decade running community newspapers. So we're hoping his media experience will help protect me from the local media as well. And with that, I also want to acknowledge the Council's really deep appreciation of the work that Doug Stewart did over the last 3 months, stepping in not to be a caretaker, but actually to be the CAO, moved a number of things forward, and having worked with us long enough to know that key issues and just absolutely stellar job on communicating to Council. And the other reality is you never really know how somebody's going to be in that position, but one of the key attributes is being unflappable, and Doug was unflappable. And there was a lot of stuff thrown at him that could have made him flap, but he wasn't. It was great, and we really appreciate the communication approach, but also the fact that you moved things forward and started tracking action items and things that we know we needed to do. So we really appreciate that. So we have an agenda that was circulated. First, a motion to adopt the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. Any additions or deletions, anything from staff? Okay. Motion, all those in favor? That's been adopted as circulated. And we have two appointments this evening. The first, Gillian Brady, who is speaking on behalf of the Sunshine Coasters for Meatless Monday. And when you're ready, you can just push the button in front of you, and I'll turn it on. And now it's live. So welcome.
Showing red.
That's right.
Oh, thank you. We're not sure if this will all work. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is, Gillian Brady. I'm a retired teacher living in Gibsons with time to volunteer now. I'm here with a few supporters to request you proclaim June 12th as the first Meatless Monday in Sechelt. I have a petition signed by about 180 people that I collected a while ago that I'll give over to you apparently at the end. Okay. I'd like to show you first a YouTube video. It's from the States and it's from 2011, but I chose it because it's very short and sweet. So let's see if I click on this. Nope, that's not the YouTube video. Let's see.
We eat an awful lot of meat. About a half a pound of meat a day on average. That's 180 pounds a year. We eat an awful lot of meat Americans ate in 1960. About a half a pound of meat a day. The problem is, we eat an awful lot of that meat can be harmful. About a half a pound of meat a day. Diets high in red and processed. That's 180 cancer, heart disease, and stroke.
Would you like to start again?
A meat-heavy diet can lead to higher body weight, obesity, and eventually diabetes.
I knew this would never be simple.
No more double clicking.
Okay.
Single click.
Okay.
We eat an awful lot of meat.
Maybe you could just
We eat an
stay
awful
there.
lot of meat. About a half a pound of meat a day on average. That's 180 pounds a year. That's twice the meat Americans ate in 1960. The problem is, eating all that meat can be harmful to your health. Diets high in red and processed meats are linked to cancer, heart disease, and stroke. A meat-heavy diet can lead to higher body weight, obesity, and eventually diabetes. Eating all that meat also affects our planet. The meat industry generates nearly 1/5 of man-made greenhouse gas emissions, accelerating climate change. Also, the water demands on livestock are huge. An estimated 2,500 gallons of water go into a single pound of beef. Plus, it takes 20 times more fuel to make feed for beef versus plant-based protein. So does this mean we should give up on meat altogether? Not at all. But how about cutting back one day a week? Join the global Meatless Monday movement. The idea is simple. Go meatless on Mondays for your health and the health of the planet. You can do it at home, at work, at school, at restaurants. It's easy. There are so many tasty, healthy, meatless meals to explore. Plus, you can save money, and you'll be in good company. In fact, we're popping up all around the country and the world. Are you ready to start your week off right? Come join the Meatless Monday movement. Just go to our website, meatlessmonday.org, to learn more. Do it for your health and the health of the planet. We eat an awful lot of meat, about a half a pound of meat a day. We eat an awful lot of meat, about a half a pound of meat on average. That's 180 pounds a year. That's twice the meat.
Okay. And now, down to there. By all means, go while you're here. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
So, rule number 1, check out your technology. Thank you.
I tried. As for the history of Meatless Monday, it was created in 2003 by an advertising guru called Sid Lerner in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University. Their purpose was to inspire people to improve their health by reducing meat intake. So health is the first reason to increase plant-based food in our diets. A second reason, and what drives me personally, is to reduce the cruelty to animals raised in factory farms. The third reason to cut out the meat one day a week is for the environment. As pointed out in the video, intensive meat and dairy production is adding massively to greenhouse gases and reducing available water. We choose to promote Meatless Mondays, to use their campaign, as it's a positive answer to the question many people ask, what can I do to help? Particularly about the health of the planet. So I'd like to show you now, this shows that you see it, the Meatless Monday American site. It's amazing. Of course, it's got all of the, does this work? Recipes online and wherever, tells all about, okay, these what they call toolkits. For example, Meatless Monday in restaurants. Provides free for anybody who wants them to use them, any of the promotional materials there. So they've got cute posters, little restaurant table toppers, stickers. So I just go to the copy shop and have them print anything. There's no cost to using any of it. So it's so user friendly. What else was I gonna say? Okay, so next, just what we've been doing on the coast, I guess. So I'll try for the third page, allow. And this should show our local Facebook site. Skip. No, can't read it. I don't want to go to that particularly. Wait. Log in. No. How about just that one? Okay, that's good. That's our site. No, not now. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't think so. No.
Didn't work.
Go away. Yeah, Okay, well, this is our Facebook site. On it, as you can imagine, there are recipes. I just wanted to be able to, I can scroll down, you can see it. We had advertisement that there's a meeting at Sechelt Town Council tonight, vegetarian and vegan recipes. We put up all sorts of postings about local markets when they're having sales, farm gate markets. We also put up notices about local sources for meat that's raised in a more kindly way. So, for example, in Powell River, there's Myrtle Point Heritage Farms, and they're raising pork, turkeys, they've got lamb, and once a month or so they bring a big shipment down to Roberts Creek. So if people want to know about that, or where to get organic food like Blue Goose at Super Value, and also the SPCA certified foods that are in the stores. We've got topical articles, I think I said that. So from 2013 to 16, we put about 6 small articles and letters to the editor in the local papers. Then in 2014 and 15, we had 2 major events. I wanted to show the coupon, but I don't think I will try. So we put quarter-page ads in the Coast Reporter and the Local, saying you can get 25% off a vegetarian special at a particular day. It was March 12th example. And we had about 12 restaurants participating each time. Blackfish, IGA Deli, Leo's, Patra, Sita, Sweet Berries, More Cafe, the Olive Oil Company, Gumboot, the Old Boot, and Ties. All of those places said yes 2 years in a row, and people went and got their 25% off. We didn't keep it up, but this year is the year we'd like to do it again, and in a bigger way. We'd love your support, and we'd try having, oh, I see the time. The schools and businesses go into. Vancouver proclaimed Meatless Monday in June of 2013. They've got it running now in 2 colleges, BCIT and Humber, and 2 high schools. And we'd like to start it up big here. Are there any questions? I'll go quickly because sorry.
No, that's fine.
Took a while. Okay.
You get some extra time for the technical difficulties.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Any questions from council and Councillor Inkster or comments?
Should we just take this as it is? Yeah. Thank you very much. No questions.
Yes, Councillor Inkster would.
I had
sorry.
one. I was just waiting for you to
Oh,
deal with that issue. I'm a little, based on your presentation, I'm probably going to dream about meat, which is not what you intended. It's a meat piece that it was mentioning meat, right? But
I'm not a vegetarian myself.
yeah.
I'd like to be, but yeah, a little bit is
Well,
good.
that's interesting because I think we all need to gradually move away from it.
That's right.
That's what
That's
we're
right.
hoping for, right?
Exactly.
I think the important part about that not a lot of people know about meat, and it was referenced in the video, is the amount of resources that there's needed to create 1 pound of meat. Not only
Absolutely.
the growing of wheat and the growing of grains to feed to the animals, but the water they need. And if you just want to remind everyone of if you remember the
numbers.
data, the numbers, it's
No,
like
I
300 and I think it's 400 gallons of water or something for 1 pound of meat.
There's an incredible video shown at Heritage Theatre
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, Cowspiracy,
Yeah.
and it talks to why, all the Greenpeace, all the agencies are talking about turning your tap off a little, not using your hose,
Yeah.
your hose, and in the meantime, the huge, enormous user of all of our resources is the cattle industry.
Yes.
And the rich groups in the United States they went in and had people in Greenpeace saying that they wouldn't support Greenpeace at all if they started really pushing that kind of agenda.
Yeah, oil too. There's a huge amount of consumption of petroleum products to get 1 pound of meat. So water and oil. So it's just amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The petition would go across to our corporate officer. If you want a proclamation, we do actually have proclamation forms and applications, and we have some criteria. I think you probably qualify in terms of being local and locally driven and stuff. So Ms. Jordison can see you on the way out, or you can send an email to her tomorrow and she'll give you the form to fill out so we can get it in place by then. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. The second delegation this evening on a very different topic is Mr. Evans from Ocean View Realty on the Business Improvement Area Bylaw. So we'll let Meatless Monday group move from front row and invite Mr. Evans. You may want to adjust the mic.
Council. I do want to speak a little bit about, maybe 5 or 6 minutes, about the proposal to kind of restructure how the SDBA is funded. We're talking about spreading it out between business licenses, not just property owners. They're talking about maybe widening the area a bit, and moreover, the method used to seek public approval for this is something that kind of caught my eye. So anyway, Mayor and Council, my name is Mike Evans. I'm a longtime resident of Sechelt. I was raised in Sechelt and went to school here. I've owned and operated several businesses, the most recent, Remax Ocean View. I only mention that, well, for one, being a business owner, it's going to affect me, but two, I'm a born and raised son of Sechelt. I've been here my life, and my whole life, and I'm really concerned about the downtown. I'm really concerned about the commercial sector and the challenges it faces. So that's what I want to speak on tonight. The proposal itself, I've heard that this proposal is just a way to more equitably share the burden of the contributions from the business sector. Some businesses will pay a little less, as a matter of fact. More businesses will share in the contributions. For instance, instead of the Trail Bay Mall representing just one property owner and one share contributed, each person having a business license there would now be taxed in some way. I don't have the exact figure. Some may call that more equitable, but anytime your budget goes from $44,000 to $70,000, anytime your contributions go from $44,000 to $70,000, it doesn't sound so equitable anymore. It's a 56% increase, and it comes at a poor time. The approval process, too, for this increase, the so-called petition against method, I was unaware that this method even existed. I didn't know that it's sort of like negative option billing. I didn't know it existed, but I was surprised to see that it's there. Section 213 of the Community Charter lays it out, essentially says council can consider the measure approved if they don't hear objections from owners representing 50% of the assessed value of properties in the area to be taxed. If they don't hear objections from 50% of the owners. Now, that may be permissible under the Community Charter, but it's an awful way to go about something like this. It's awful. It's similar, as I mentioned, to negative option billing. A cable company tried this, I think, in 2005 in Ontario. They sent their customers a notice saying, we're going to give you more services, we're also going to up your bill. It didn't go over so well. It ended up in court cases, and Ontario changed their legislation because of it. That's what we have here. This petition against method of approval, it's just like a negative option billing that cable customers rejected. And many of the folks that I've spoken to in the business community are rejecting it too. Petition against should be used for small issues. There would be no problem if you were asking whether or not we should put up street banners in May or June. Which should it be? Sure, petition against. What color to paint the crosswalks? Sure. But if we're trying to get approval for a 56% increase in contributions that the businesses have to put up, if we're taking our budget from $44,000 to $70,000, we need a better approach, a more democratic approach, and a less sneaky approach. I think it is sneaky. The 50% threshold, what about the figure needed to get this measure set aside? The last referendum in Sechelt got a total voter turnout, and I hope my figures are correct. I got it off the internet, so it's got to be true. The last referendum in Sechelt got a total voter turnout of 23%. The last municipal election in Sechelt got a total voter turnout of 47%. So you see the problem. With such low voter turnout, the petition against process would simply never, ever fail. Anything you put forward by that method would have a huge chance. It's not particularly democratic. It's virtually impossible to ever attract enough voter turnout to counter the petition against. It just sounds wrong to me. Apathy in the business community. It's something that would be on your mind. Some may say it's hard to get the business community interested in these things. And some would say the level of interest is so poor that the only way to get the increase through is by petition against. Otherwise, there would never be enough votes. But hang on a second. Does that not make my point? There wouldn't be enough votes. Doesn't that make my point? If there isn't the interest, that means there's no support. If there's no support, why are we proceeding? Let's remember that the business association is supposed to benefit the business community. If it's such a great proposal, if it's such a good deal, if it has the support of the business community, if the business community is paying the bill, why not get the approval the old-fashioned way? A vote for, not a vote against. There are other methods of getting approval. And looking at the community charter, I noticed the petition against is section 213. Section 212, right above it, is more of an affirmation. Section 212 of the community charter says it has a more familiar way to seek approval. It calls for an affirmative vote from owners representing 50% of the assessed values of property in the area to be taxed. Exactly the opposite. In other words, it puts the onus back on council to show why the proposal should be approved, instead of putting the onus on ratepayers to show why it shouldn't be approved. That's just more sensible. Now, the business community in Sechelt is struggling. Vacancies. At some point, we have to recognize that businesses in Sechelt aren't doing as well as they should be. We've all seen the vacancies up and down the streets. We've seen vacancies in the mall. This never used to happen. There's all sorts of them right now. We've also seen high rates of turnover in businesses. The business that's there for this month is gone next month, and someone else is there in their place. What happened? It all points to one thing. It's hard to make a go of it in downtown Sechelt. Obviously, there's only one reason for that. Businesses don't close for any other reason than financial pressure. You just don't take more money from the sector that's struggling, you take less. So who pays this extra money? Every extra cent squeezed out of the commercial property landlords is passed along to the tenants. It all gets rolled into triple net expenses, every cent of it. Some of you may know what commercial leases look like. Some of you may not. You haven't had to deal with it. There's a cost per square foot that's assigned, and you pay that as the tenant. But then there's also a cost that represents your share of taxes and utilities and levies. Levies like the SDBA levy. So through triple net recovery by the landlord, every cent of the SDBA increases, every cent of it will be coming out of the pocket of the tenants. The same tenants I just described as having tough times these days in Sechelt. I did an informal poll in my little neck of the woods there, and each of the merchants I spoke to who will now be receiving a bill from their landlord, each of those merchants I spoke to were opposed to this. They just don't want another dollar in tax. Never mind 386 or 400, they don't want another dollar. As a matter of fact, at some point in the very near future, there's going to be quite a few of us coming to you to say it's time to do something about commercial tax in Sechelt before we're buried. But back to this, they don't want another cent. So in summary, this proposal is wrong, and the method that you're considering to pass it is wrong. And I urge you to take the high road, either cancel this increase outright, or go back to section 212, right above section 213. Go to section 212 section of the community charter, calls for an affirmative vote. Let's get a 50% vote of approval to proceed, not try and get a 50% vote against to stop it. And that's my presentation. I have here a whole bunch of copies, pretty much word for word of exactly what I presented to you. I can just leave it someplace.
Thanks.
And that's my presentation. You'll take it.
And if you just, I'm sure there might be a few comments or questions. And
You may or may not be. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but this particular issue troubles me.
yeah, I can tell, and sympathetic to how that makes you feel. A couple of technical points. This is driven entirely by the business community. This is driven entirely by the business community. It is not a council initiative. And what's ironic is when the counter petition is sent out to people asking them if they disapprove, We had a number of people responding immediately that it showed the council was trying to deep six the project, that we're actually trying to block it. We're absolutely neutral on this. So it's interesting that on the one hand, you think it's a sneaky way to put it through, and there was other comments that the council was trying to block it by using a negative approach. So
I only appear here and direct my comments to you because I understand you have the power to stop it.
yes and no. So I'll look to, the one microphone is on, I'm not sure. No, okay. Any other questions? I think we heard clearly what the position was, and Councillor Mueller?
I have a question, but it's not actually directed towards you. It'd be to, I believe, our Director of Corporate and Financial Services. If you can answer this, what is the number of electors required? Because we're talking about businesses, business licenses, so I just wanted to be clear on that point about the numbers to actually successfully counter petition.
It's only property owners that can vote. The business owners can't, and Joanne would have that.
So based on the BC assessment property information, there are 100 and, I don't have it right in front of me, but since I'm in the middle right now of certifying the petitions, I have the number quite clear, and I believe it's 184 individual properties within the BIA. So you would need to have over 50%. Enough petitions that would represent over 50% of those properties, and that those properties in total represent over 50% of assessed value of the total.
So 93 properties out of 184 would be 50% plus one. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to be clear on that to get an idea of the order of magnitude. I was listening to the point about the process used for this, and because it's a continuance, it seemed fair. And I think that, you know, hearing that number, 92, 93, that's a few afternoons making phone calls. It is. Yeah. So I just want to be clear on the numbers.
Actually, I think it was 128. I'm sorry, now that I think of it. I shouldn't give answers without it right in front of me, but I believe it's 128 properties, actually, in the BIA.
And again, part of the process is the, unlike Rogers, who increased your bill and then let you phone in and complain about it, before the raise goes through, the district actually manages the process by sending the information and a request to every single property owner that's affected to hear their views on it before we make a decision. So every single property owner has received in mail the counter petition and whatever it is they fill out.
The notice and information, but not the counter petition, but it's in the notice, it tells the property owner how they can get the petition.
I only mentioned Rogers because it is, in my mind, highly analogous to the process. It might not be exact in every detail. It's highly analogous.
No, when I was listening to you, I thought if you don't like the counter petition, you really won't like the alternate approval process.
Well, the alternate approval process, actually, in this case, it would be vastly preferable, the alternate approval process, because they only require 10% to set it aside.
So you could get 10%.
And that's another thing I wondered about. I decided, in the interest of brevity, to not increase everything, not regurgitate everything I'd found out, but now that you bring up alternate approval process, you could set that aside and not send something to referendum with only 10% against, not 50. So I'd love that, actually.
Okay. 10% would set it to a referendum.
Pardon?
10% would set it to a full referendum. That's how that would work.
If you wanted to take something to a referendum, a petition of 10% against would send it back. Is it not a way of seeking approval to take something to referendum?
No, it's to avoid a referendum.
Okay.
That's why it's considered somewhat sneaky, because it's sort of it's an alternate to the referendum.
I got to admit, I read it about 35 times and came to both conclusions.
We're dealing with it now because there's, as you've probably read in the news, our fiscal position puts us in a position of needing voter approval for repairing the roof, $200,000. And so we're actually debating how, we want that to be open and transparent, and we want the voters to approve. But of course, we're wondering what the best way to get that approval is for something like absolutely necessary maintenance. So outside of the BIA. So anyways, that's why
your dilemma in an era where 47% of the populace shows up for municipal vote. I appreciate your dilemma.
So, anyways, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments and input. And Councillor Mueller has a final comment.
Yeah, it was just more of a point for information as to when would the deadline would be for that petition to come forward in this process, just so anyone who does have an issue can feel free to organize on that.
And again, our corporate officer.
The petition actually, it was a 30-day time period, and it closed this past Monday, April 3rd, at end of business day. And we are still in the process right now of going through the petitions to certify the final amount of petitions received, and I will be bringing a report forward to the April 19th regular council meeting, reporting on the results and next steps for council.
Okay. And even though the petition is closed, there has been far more concern this time, maybe because of the increase, maybe because of the change of using business licenses rather than property ownership. So council will look at that very closely, regardless of what the results are. Thank you for that delegation, though. Appreciate it. There are no proclamations this evening. We'll save the time for June 12th when we proclaim Meatless Monday. Number 5, adoption of the minutes of previous council meetings. First is the meeting of Wednesday, March 15th, regular 4 o'clock meeting. And I'd look for somebody to move receipt and adoption. Thank you, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Inkster. All those in favor? That's carried. And the minutes of March 15th, the regular evening meeting. Motion to receive, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor of adoption? And that's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 8, bylaws for 3 readings. We have before us the District of Sechelt Public Sewer Amendment Bylaw. And first, a motion to receive the report from the corporate officer, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? Like to speak to the report?
Worship, this is actually an item from Council's outstanding resolution list. This is a resolution that goes back to last year. It's basically a housekeeping matter to bring 2 bylaws in line with one another, the 2 statutory bylaws that control a number of items under our public sewer system, including the timeline for when a property must hook up to the sanitary sewer once it becomes available. I have, for reference, attached the original staff report that was considered when council subsequently resolved that staff be directed to bring forward the sewer bylaw to make it in line with the plumbing bylaw so that there is a 2-year period instead of a 1-year period as was stated. So the bylaw is in front of you. Once adopted, it will amend the sewer bylaw.
Okay, and the recommendation is to give it 3 readings, so we'll move directly on to that bylaw and see how that moves. So do I have somebody move first reading of District of Sechelt Bylaw number 112-7, 2017, a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt Public Sewer Bylaw number 112, 1990. Councillor Mueller, Councillor Wright, all those in favor of first reading? And somebody to move second reading of bylaw number 112-7, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Shanks. Any discussion at second reading? Any amendments to propose? All those in favor of second reading? And somebody to move third reading, please, of Councillor Lutz and Councillor Mueller second. Third reading of bylaw number 1112-7, 2017, a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt Public Sewer Bylaw number 1112, 1990. All those in favor? And third reading is also carried. Moving on to business items, we have a number of business items coming from the Arts and Cultural Coordinator. We may be able to go through them fairly quickly. Item 10.1, first a motion to receive the report. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Shanks, all those in favor? Siobhan Smith, Arts and Culture Coordinator. Would you like to speak to this report?
Sure. So you have before you a report requesting authorization for entering into a contract with Arcadian Productions for the purpose of producing our 2017 Summer Music Series. That's about all I have to say. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
So this was a competitive bid in 2016 and simply a quote for 2017?
Correct. The difference in price this year being an increase of $500 from 2016. And that is to ensure that there is sufficient funds for advertising in case some of the sponsorships and partnerships we had last year do not come through. But that is essentially the only difference other than dates and that sort of thing.
And who seeks those partnerships? Arcadian or yourself?
In previous years, it was myself, but we're at a point now where the producer is able to do these things more independently.
Okay. Any further discussion? Questions? Councillor Mueller?
Just a question now that we're on the issue of single source procurement. It's not listed under the policy implications, but is this in keeping with our procurement standards currently?
I did seek approval to do single sole source. What's the word I'm looking for? To sole source this. And that was approved. Sorry, I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase?
We're hoping that the approval you got was within the policy guidelines. We're sure it is.
I believe it is, and I think I could make my question more direct as I don't recall the exact dollar figure at this time.
Is it under 20,000?
For procurement, yeah, single sourcing, so perhaps.
Actually, unfortunately, I don't know the dollar amount, but really it's more of anything over $10,000, which should go to a competitive bid, and then single source is an option in lieu of a competitive bid if it's deemed desirable or expedient to do so.
And then you look at a number of criteria to see if it's desirable. And
That's correct. It's not really an amount so much as the process in this case. Because they had done an RFP the prior year, and it was deemed expedient to do it this way, and then do an RFP for next year.
So every 2 or 3 years you might do an RFP?
We will do one next year. Yes.
Perhaps that one could be for 2 years. Do we have somebody to move the recommendation 1.2, Councillor Wright and Councillor Inkster, and wish to speak to it? Councillor Wright.
And this is in the budget?
Yes, Your Worship, it is.
Thank you.
Good job. All those in favor? That's carried. And the next item, item 10 point. My pages are all out of order. Item 10.2 is the standing grant agreements. First, a motion to receive. Councillor Lutz and Mueller, all those in favor? That's carried. And could you briefly speak to this, please?
Sure. So before you is a report regarding we're seeking authorization to enter into agreements for multi-year grants, what are known as standing grants, under our Community Investment Grant Program. These five, we're dealing with 4 of the 5 that Council has given approval for us to move forward with for this year. The 5th we will hopefully deal with at the next Council meeting. Okay.
And Council approved this as a way of giving stable funding to those that receive long-standing grants. So I can have somebody move recommendations 1.2 to 1.5. Councillor Wright, Councillor Inkster. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Now item 10.3, Restorative Justice Program. First, a motion to receive. Councillor Wright, Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And again, I'd look to, in this case, corporate officer, it's from two, Arts and Culture Communications Coordinators. We'll look again to speak briefly to this.
Your Worship, I would agree with Siobhan. I assisted in the drafting of the agreements, but as the manager of the operation, she's better for this.
Okay, and we'll try and remember to record everything. Makes it easier for the others.
So you have before you a report recommending that authorization be granted to enter into a lease with the Restorative Justice Program for the Sunshine Coast, who that group leases or uses space within a district-owned facility, the Rockwood Lodge building, office number 2. I just noticed now as I'm reading the report, there was a typo. It says room, oh no, there's no typo. It's perfect.
Okay. That's good. That's good. Don't look too closely. And just a question to the Director of Finance on this. When we're considering our contributions to the community, I know that we're now taking a more realistic view of the tax exemptions as, in fact, contribution that's going directly to. In something like this, where we're giving somebody a 3-year lease on rent far, far, far below market value, do we calculate the contribution, the difference between what a market value for the office would be and what $10 a year would be in terms of our overall contribution to the social services or to that particular agency?
Your Worship, it's actually not something that we've been tracking through our financial system, but we certainly could and record it as a grant to them, and offsetting with the rent revenue is not something we've been tracking in the system at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure about offsetting it against the revenue, but I certainly think that in our presentation of how well and how the district supports various social programs, we need to start making that more clear. And this is one where the Restorative Justice Program does get a grant from us, but they also get this significant in-kind.
We certainly do that. In the annual report, it hasn't been tracked, I don't believe, but we could start doing that.
Yeah, I think it would be useful. So somebody to move the recommendation 1.2. Oh, make sure it's on the floor. Was it on the floor already? No. Okay, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Shanks, it's on the floor, and then to speak to it.
Yes, I would like to speak to it. I think it's important that we do track this as part of the granting. It's long been something that many of us have spoken to other levels of government about funding. And we save the courts time and money by supporting and having this service. I think we need to have a very good record of the kind of contribution that this level of government is giving to this particular group if we are going to have any kind of an argument for funding from the court systems or other levels. So I think that's very important.
And following up on the earlier discussion of sole source contracting, who gets these beneficial rates? In a sense, we don't advertise that we have offices for social services. People come forward and end up in this situation. It's, again, something we might want to look at the process on that as we go through. Any further discussion of the issue and the recommendation before us? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you for supporting that. Item 10.4, Festival of Written Arts. Motion to receive the report. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Shanks, all those in favor? And somebody to move the recommendation. Councillor Inkster, Councillor Shanks, and anything you'd like to report on this from the Arts and Culture Coordinator?
Sure. So this is similar to the last one. This one is a renewal of a lease agreement that we have with the Sunshine Coast Festival of the Written Arts for use of 2 district-owned buildings at Rockwood Gardens. The 3rd building on that property is owned by the festival themselves.
I had difficulty figuring out if there was any, it seems to be a wide open use of all of the buildings, and so there's no conflict of use of the lodge, for example, or is it, doesn't seem to be a very specific.
They actually do apply for a special event permit each year.
Okay.
So if there was any concern, it would be addressed at that time, but it's a well-known sort of standing use, if you will. It's a quite limited use of the lodge itself. It's only for the few days that the festival occurs, whereas the box office building is a year-round use.
Thank you. Councillor Mueller?
Just to follow up on the point there raised by the mayor, as I was reading through these particular leases, I was just curious if staff could report on the ability of the public to continue to use these while these other types of leases are in place, and if there's been any impingement that we can hear about now on the ability of the public to rent and other types of events to occur.
No concerns have been brought to my attention. It's possible that if there were any, they would be brought to the attention of our facilities booking coordinator, Joan Graham. But I haven't heard of any concern. The building is still available for use, by rental by local nonprofits. And
Corporate Officer Frank.
Yes, I just wanted to further to what Siobhan's just said, that item 10 bracket 3 actually adds that the festival acknowledges that the land shall be generally open and accessible to the public. So although they use it, they don't have any rights over any other events or things that could occur outside of the dates of the festival.
Okay. In my reading of the contract, I found the language on parking a little bit less than clear, because in fact it gives them, they agree that the existing parking lot will be made available for the use, but in fact they don't use it for parking. Yeah, they don't use it for parking, and we don't, and then we ask them to make sure there's necessary parking for all assembly events. So just something to keep in mind. They use it for other purposes. They put tents and tables and chairs and things of that nature out there. They use it for vending, books, meaning there's quite a few parking spots not available. Now, do we have the motion, the recommendation moved yet? Okay, good. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. And finally, 10.5, motion to receive the report on the lease for the Arts Centre. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Inkster. All those in favor? And a quick report from the author of the report.
Yes, so again, looking for authorization to renew a lease agreement with the Sunshine Coast Arts Council for use of district-owned land that their art gallery, the Sunshine Coast Arts Centre, is located on.
And a motion to make this recommendation 1.2, Councillor Inkster, thank you, and Councillor Wright. Any discussion of this? And again, it's one that if we could see the difference between market value and lease rates, it would be useful for our overall picture of how we support social and cultural events. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? And that's carried, thank you. Item 10.6. We have a report for information from Mr. Thompson, who's not here, Director. Yeah, is there anything before we do receipt?
Not really. I was just going to
Okay.
introduce the report.
First, let's get it on the floor. Councillor Shanks moved, seconded by Councillor Lutz. All those in favor of receipt? And we'll turn then to the Director of Planning. Interim.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we chose to give Aaron Thompson the evening off for once, because this is the only item from him on this tonight. So, and it's simply for information to provide for council the traffic impact study that was completed to support multiple projects being done in the West Sechelt neighborhood. So there's 5 projects, development projects being proposed in that neighborhood, and this traffic impact study is looking at the impact of those developments. It's a large report, 682 pages, so we didn't attach it to the agenda, but it is available online.
Thank you for that. Any questions of from what we've read of the report, or are we just and conclusions, or are we going to wait until we've actually digested the online report and bring it back? It is for information more than anything at this stage, but it will be part of these development proposals going forward. Then I'll look for, well, we've already received it. The report. Now let's also a motion to receive the traffic impact study prepared by RF Binney and Associates dated March 29th, 2017. Councillor Shanks and Inkster, all those in favor? It's adopted, and Councillor Inkster.
So the report will, there will be a further number of opportunities, probably, I'm assuming, at planning to talk about this further, or as you've indicated, after digestion further of the report that's online, the larger report?
It's also going to be integrated into the proposals coming forward, because that's going to be part of their first reading and public hearings. So this will show up in several of those 5 or 6 key area developments. That will be one place where it can be discussed to see if it in fact is an effective report, and that'll also outline the servicing agreements and contributions that will need to be made by different proponents as their portion of that reconfigurations that may be needed because of the traffic. So that's one place it'll come up.
Yeah.
But it's useful if we can read it through as councillors to be informed of the general nature of those events. So when it does come back in that other context, we have that background.
Yeah, I think it's really important that, and most likely it'll be referenced on a continual basis over the next couple of years based on the developments that are mainly occurring in this particular part of Sechelt, and the fact that it will have, other than traffic issues, but also cross-town alternative route issues, including pedestrian and bicycle traffic. So it'll be an important document moving forward in terms of what we hope will be a change in traffic patterns away from the highway.
The only clarification I would make is I sincerely hope, despite the staff shortages, that it doesn't take us a couple of years to approve all of those developments. I hope we see the end of them in 2017. Not the end, but the actual launch and beginning of them in 2017. That's what I'm hoping for. Okay, moving on to item 10.7, which is the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. Recommendations from the forest, which is Sechelt Community Projects Incorporated, to the shareholder, and we have a letter dated February 24th. I'm sorry for the delay between February 24th and April 3rd. I'm not sure what that was about. First, a motion to receive. Councillor Shanks and Councillor Inkster, all those in favor? Okay, and in it we have 4 recommendations for distribution and dispersal of monies from the Legacy Fund, and my understanding is this $68,000, whatever it is, references money that was remaindered at the end of the 2016 year. So with that subject as our understanding, there was, as you remember, some grants approved, some not approved, some back and forth, but at the end of the day, it sort of stopped. And now this is coming back with a second intake, which is another thing that we suggested, that they spread their intakes so they could compare them. And we've got 4 in front of us that we'd like to recommend. I think we'll do them individually. Makes it easier. So first, is there anyone to move the recommendation of the trailer and support for the Gibsons Wildlife Rehabilitation Center? Councillor Shanks and Inkster. Any discussion of that one? All those in favor? That's carried. And somebody to move the support for the Davis Bay Elementary School Growing Greenhouse Project. Councillor Inkster and Councillor Shanks. Any discussion of that, which is to add solar panels to their greenhouse project? Oh, right beside me. Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. It's interesting, as I looked at the application for this particular project, the first thing I looked for is how much money is the school district putting into this particular project. It's not the first time I've brought this up, but here again we have the school district putting no money into a project that's on their property. And that doesn't sit very well with me. Thank you. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you. My concern, I'm in support of this, just so you know, but my concern with the project is they seem to have had a lot of trouble raising the last $8,000 to $10,000 they need to actually assemble and put the greenhouse up. So if there's anybody in the community with deep pockets or many, many small pockets, this group still needs to find a way to erect the greenhouse and get it operating. And I'm not sure what's stalled there and why, but it seems to have. Councillor Inkster.
Yeah, it might be the group that's connected to the PAC, which is their PAC, just in terms of working really hard on the overall plan, the amounts of money that are needed for various aspects of the project, and perhaps grant writing and parent fatigue with the regular PAC work that they do at Davis Bay Elementary. So that might be an indication of that. And I'm glad to see there's some support at this table because of the important sustainability, learning components and community use components of this building once completed. I wish the school board was more involved in stuff outside the classroom, but that tends to be where they want to focus the money. A lot of the fields for sports on the Sunshine Coast, a lot of the complaints, and the reason our fields are so well used is the school board fields aren't in as good a shape as they could be. So that's sort of another connection to the fact that the money's staying in the classroom with what the government's putting in. And in reference to your other thing about the money that they may need now, is I have an idea that just came to me yesterday, and I'll let council know if it comes to fruition tomorrow about getting them some more help.
Good. And in terms of tracking, it may also be useful for us to track all of the capital and operational support we provide to the school board, whether it be for adventure playgrounds at West Sechelt, or in this case, potentially, depending on council's vote, greenhouse. It's not a small amount. It's probably not too much over 6 figures, but I bet it's close to 6 figures. And I see two there, Councillor Lutz and then
Thank
Councillor
you.
Miller.
I too am always concerned when we take on school district funded or not funded projects. In this case, this greenhouse would take up a lot of public land elsewhere. So I feel that's probably the extent of the contribution from School District 46. I think that using it as a classroom in time will hopefully generate some funding from the school district, because it won't just be the community. It will hopefully have a lot of students involved. So let's keep banging on their door. But I support this project too.
And Councillor Miller.
Yes, thank you. With this particular project, I really see the value in it becoming an example for other parts of the community and perhaps for other schools. I don't know if we could build a facility like this at every school, so there's an issue there with the equality that underlines it, but if it can be used as an example, and I'm not sure if there's anybody here behind this project today in the gallery, but that's something that I think would really demonstrate long-term community value for an investment such as this for solar panels. Thanks.
Thank you. And the Nature School has got a lot of support. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Roof over bridge at Sechelt Marsh. Motion to consider the third recommendation, which is a $10,000 grant to the Sunshine Coast Natural History Society. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright. Any discussion of this item? other than me wondering why an outside, I just wondered about a roof over a walkway when you're trying to get people outside.
It's rained a lot.
I know it rains a lot. Okay, any further discussion? I'll call this question as well. All those in favor? That's carried. And structural improvements to the heritage buildings in Davis Bay. This is a request from the Davis Bay Wilson Creek Selma Park Community Association and for a joint funded project. Motion to consider the structural improvements of $25,000 grant. Councillor Inkster, seconded by Councillor Shanks. Discussion. I see Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Nice to see that it's going to be joint this time. I really do appreciate that. However, this is the second time that this particular association has gotten money in 3 years. And so when I look at the first statement in the letter, it says that there was $300,000 of total funding applications that were reviewed. I have to wonder if there wasn't somebody in the other $240,000 that wasn't worthy. And just gives me pause with reference to special interests, okay?
Okay, and I think, as I recall, some of the debate on this, some of the 8 applications were very large, and so giving them a small amount wasn't suitable, but they did try and spread the remaining funds where they could. Any other discussion of this item? Then I'll call the question. All in favor of supporting this project? Any opposed? That's carried. Uneventful. Yes, you absolutely may. And the question is too?
Well, I guess there's 2 representatives here, and job continuously well done, but just wanted to ask you through you, in case maybe perhaps you know, is when the next, because this is carryover, when there's a discussion and or consideration and intake of the next set of requests.
The annual general meeting is set for May 8th now, I think,
yeah,
which will be the time of the dividend. And then your own process for the community forest, when do you actually advertise that there's funds available for 2017? Is that an ongoing one, or do you? We haven't set a date yet at this time. But it'll be around or after the AGM? Yeah. That's a very wise thing to do. Thank you for that. I'm sure Councillor Wright appreciates that as well. So, but probably in late spring.
And so we don't have an indication of what that may be, the dividend to be divided?
We have an indication, but it's
okay.
It's not public, and we want to wait until there's an AGM to verify that, and we'll see the financial statements. And
okay.
Can't believe it. 10.7. 11.1, we're into reports from councillors. Let's start with reports from councillors. Councillor Shanks, we'll start at your end.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Yes, I attended a special finance meeting, planning meeting, public works meeting, and the public hearing all on March the 22nd. I think it was a highlight for me on that particular date was that planning department came forward with a complete list of development proposals that are in the works and currently their status. And that's going to be a monthly report that's brought to planning and council so that we too can track those things and be aware of those things that are happening in our community, which heretofore we haven't always been aware of before the public is. So that's an extremely good move, and I look forward to those reports being updated. Aside from that, just been dealing with 2 or 3 public issues in terms of drainage concerns, and in one instance, a clear cutting on a private lot. So I've contacted the necessary staff people, and they will be looking into those issues. That's all.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Inkster, any reports?
Thank you. I just wanted to mention two events that occurred here, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the information that was gathered last weekend. There was a public hearing a number of days ago that we were involved in, council was involved in. There was an important meeting yesterday with the RTC dialogue session that I thought was helpful to council to see two groups, in a sense, start talking. It ended better than it started. So we'll see where that information exchange goes, and glad to see when we have large pieces of important land like that we can get people together to talk about what they'd like to see. So we'll see where that goes in terms of the final product. I wanted to mention the Columbia Institute that two council members were able to make it to. The third was unable to go this year, but I'm sure she'll go next year with all the good information that they pass out on a regular basis. And just for the topics that we dealt with, other than some more networking and humorous portrayals of politics and government in British Columbia and Canada. And I wanted to mention just 4 topics. The economy and transition topic was a really important one that talks about how the economy is changing in Canada and in the world, probably the developed countries, and in terms of the job change and where jobs are actually moving from the industrial age to more the commercial and E age, and how there's been a change in jobs. And one of the important ones that I mentioned today was a lot of people don't know, and I'll point out is that there was an interesting discussion over some policies that are happening in the United States, and how there's actually approximately, with the government money pouring into it, there's actually only, they said, 50,000 jobs left in coal extraction, and yet there's 300,000 jobs thus far been created in solar power energy. And I know that at least one person in our audience probably already knows that and recognizes that as in the future in a lot of ways. And the other thing we wanted to talk about was they mentioned was the climate action, some of the things that need to keep occurring in terms of climate issues and the climate change. Public responsibility, public control was another topic, and that's about engaging the public more in your processes and talking about how, and your budgets and expenditures. And the other one that I went to was the ramping up low carbon communities. I have a lot of information on all these topics if council members want it to read, but I just wanted to mention in the low carbon communities issue is that, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but on the Sunshine Coast, Sechelt is actually, because, and I think I've talked about this before, I'll just remind people, because a lot of the jobs on the Sunshine Coast are in the Sechelt area, that we actually have the least amount of citizen travel to jobs on the Sunshine Coast. So in terms of commuting to jobs, we actually have the lowest carbon footprint of all the communities on the coast in terms of what we expend and how much carbon we create to get to work and earning opportunities. And like I said, that there's more here, but I've taken up enough time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I've attended 2 Finance Committee meetings where we were pretty close to finalizing the capital budget. Attended the Public Works Committee meeting, Planning and Development Committee meeting. Went to a federal government media event where they announced the $17 million upgrade to the Langdale ferry terminal. Also went to another federal provincial government media event where they announced the $3 million that we're going to get for a sewer connection for West Sechelt. Attended the Committee of the Whole. Attended the dialogue session. My thanks goes out to the community, the developer, and the facilitators. We got through that, and I think we'll have hopefully a good resolution to that. The last thing that I attended was I attended the swearing-in ceremony for Sechelt Nation government, where they swore in their council and their chief. It was at the Longhouse. I'll leave the rest of that to Councillor Lutz. We had a good time. And that concludes my report.
Thank you for that report, and I'm very glad that some councillors were able to get there. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. Like the rest of council, I've mostly been focused on the budget deliberations, both capital and operating. I'm quite pleased with how that's gone. I know council has started to really look at some of the deep issues that we're facing financially, and I'm pleased with the response that I've seen from the Director of Finance Corporate Services in regards to some of those challenges. Not seeing any more sweeping under the rug of these issues. We're starting to deal with them, and they're not easy to deal with. But it takes council resolve to do it, and I'm starting to see that. I'm very pleased. I also attended the dialogue session that's been mentioned. That was, for me, it was interesting to see. I know that it's not a standard thing that we do, but in particular instances like this, it seemed to me like it did have some value. In the past, last council meeting, I had to send an apology to the East Porpoise Bay Community Association. I missed their AGM. It was scheduled at the same time as an important council meeting, and I'm sure that was nothing intentional. But it's unfortunate that I was able to miss that. They're both very important meetings. In my personal life, I managed to take a trip out to Revelstoke, actually, to go and check out the world famous, now beginning to be world famous ski hill there. And I spent a lot of time kind of reflecting about what that community is showing. Revelstoke's a community of about 7,000 people. For a long time, it's been kind of a hard scrabble place in between many other things. It's primary industry heading downhill and going through transition. But most recently, 2007, they approved that massive ski resort, and it is massive. It's going to be larger than Whistler when it's done. And just to see that town change in about 7 years is absolutely, it's something that gives you pause to think. It's gone from a place where they just had essentially on the verge of dilapidated older buildings, not much going on in the downtown, to now a place that has a 5-star dining almost everywhere you go, great nightlife, tons of young people flocking there, and a really vibrant scene. So it made me think a little bit about that. The people that I met on the chairlifts there, they were flying from around the world to come and be a part of that and to see it firsthand. And that's not unlike what I see when I meet people out here in the backcountry or on the beaches that have come here. They've heard about this place and they're coming here for a particular thing that they really have geared into. So I think that really kind of settled in with me. There are some different currents that are driving communities, and for the younger generations in particular, there's something that they get really passionate about. In Revelstoke, it's skiing, and it made me think. I'm curious what it's going to be for Sechelt. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I too was busy with budget meetings, committee meetings, public hearings, but last Friday was probably the most eclectic. Also attended the BC Ferries announcement by the federal government for $17 million in funding, which I found it very interesting that other than the walk-on raised loading dock, none of it will really change the service that we're getting, which I found a bit disappointing, but you don't refuse $17 million. Also got to accept on behalf of the District of Sechelt the $3 million for our sewer plans. And this has been something in the works for a long time that were put on hold, but shovel ready. And it shows the importance of having things planned ahead and ready when the money is available. So that was a great thing. I also attended the swearing in at the Sechelt Indian government, and I appreciate any opportunity to attend those kinds of ceremonies. It truly was an interesting afternoon, and that was followed by a retirement event that both Councillor Wright and I attended because it was the retirement of Marnie Baba, who has worked 30 years in the school district. And 8 years she was my vice president in the local CUPE union. So that was a great event, and some good stories were shared. So it's been a rather different couple of weeks, but as always, enjoyable. I'm looking forward to AVICC, where we get to meet with our other coastal communities and have some good debates around issues. The one other thing I wanted to just muse on a little bit, with this funding coming from the federal government, it's quite a tight time span on the spending of it. And that's going to be a lot of, I think, out-of-town workers. I think the developments that are in line over the next year, 2 years, are going to also bring a large number of workers to our community. And I'm concerned about where they will be lodging. We know that it's a real issue now for rentals. And with these all lined up, I think it's going to get even more so. Gibsons and Pender Harbor also have funding for work that will probably bring in more workers. So I think it's something we need as a whole community to talk about how we'll deal with that. So just my thoughts.
Thank you very much for that report, Councillor Lutz. And I'll just reference with the regrets that Councillor Seegers is not with us tonight. She did spend several hours in meetings with us earlier today over Skype. She's enjoying a well-earned holiday and a vacation in a warmer climate, though she has been on a number of meetings in the last week to 10 days over Skype. And it sort of reminds me that the community should recognize that we've got 6 councillors that spend an awful lot of time, and even when they're away, they stay connected. And it's not unusual to have people phoning in or Skyping in or wanting to stay in touch with things, and it's quite remarkable. And I think either that or they're scared to miss a meeting. But the community should recognize that people are spending a lot of time even when they're on vacation. And my report, just briefly, I think I would just mention the Columbia Institute conference or sessions last weekend that I attended. I think everyone will be glad to know that the very first session I spent was Friday, 9 o'clock till 12 o'clock, 3 hours on media relations. I thought I needed that refresher. And that was both interesting, and it's always important to remind ourselves, one, we have really good relationships with media on the Sunshine Coast. It's straightforward. It's not, there's no games being played. It's just, and that's really important compared to what we hear in other places. And I attended another session, I can't remember the actual name, but it had a lot of political discussion of a number of issues. And one of the speakers was Patty Backus, former school trustee of the Vancouver School Board, or maybe still a school trustee, but having been dismissed, the chair of the board, and getting some insight into that redacted WorkSafe BC report was very interesting, because many of us felt a real chill when we first read it and heard the comments and the implications of what goes on at regular council meetings, then turning into being a very difficult and stressful situation for everybody involved. And there was a number of speakers. One who Councillor Mueller will remember, Taylor Backrack. I understand he was a schoolmate at one time here in Sechelt. Oh, longer than that. Okay, further back. He did a wonderful presentation on the political trials and tribulations of bringing a rainbow crosswalk into, is it Smithers? Smithers, he's a young mayor of Smithers, and he's a great presenter, but there's lots of politics in a northern town with a strong Dutch reform base to bringing in a pride crosswalk, and he recounted that. But also very interesting was a discussion led by the mayor of Maple Ridge on basically social media and what it's meant to her as she's taken on the issue of homelessness, much to the anger of a small group in her community. And there's quite a bit of discussion among elected officials on social media and the best approach to what we all know as the negative culture in social media, or can be. And it made me walk out of that meeting thinking the minor issues we have in Sechelt are like tiny, 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 insignificant, and we should just embrace that with whatever we can, compared to some of the large-scale negative stuff that's we know is in the States, but is also in the Lower Mainland. It was pretty horrific to hear the mayor of Maple Ridge talk about social media attacks when she's with her children in restaurants, and people are creating live dialogue around that and other things. And she's mostly around the issue of homelessness, which she's decided their council needs to approach, and a number of people didn't. In that session, there was also a presentation by a councillor from Guelph on participatory budgeting, and she recounted their first attempt at participatory budgeting when, lo and behold, the public input into the budget was organized by a group of people so that there was zero funding for arts and culture and huge support for roads and sidewalks. And so I asked her how they dealt with that gaming of the system, and it wasn't dissimilar to what we did. So it goes on. And that event ended with my personal story, which was, for the first time in my life, I walked out down to the parking lot to pick up my car, and it was gone. So my car was stolen in Vancouver. I obviously stayed in a low-rent hotel. I didn't choose it. That's where the conference was. But the Vancouver police phoned me just last night and said they'd recovered it a block or two away with little or no damage. So we'll see what that's about. Moving on to 11.2. SCRD board report from the council representative. Director Wright.
Thank you, Worship. As most people know, District of Sechelt meetings and businesses conducted on Wednesday. Regional district is conducted on Thursday. And so I've had 2 Thursdays where there were absolutely no meetings. So it was a really light week. Basically, all they had was a corporate and admin services committee meeting, the hospital board, and also a board meeting. Out of that, there is one report that I will pass on to the CAO. It's about the transit expansion, and he can use that as he sees fit within the organization. The other report is a quarterly report they do on directors' expenses. And I took quite a bit of grief at the meeting because my expenses at the regional district were 0, and they didn't like that. Having said that, we can expect a letter from the regional district about the archives, and they want to know things like, how did it get there, and is it a Sechelt Archives, or is it a Sunshine Coast Archives, and why is it where it is? And actually, they tried to draw me into a rather interesting discussion at the meeting, and I said if they were interested in knowing the answer to those questions, please send us a letter and we'd be happy to respond to it. And it was somebody playing silly games, and having said that, we'll respond to the letter when we get it. And that concludes my report.
Okay, that leaves us with a teaser to find out what their interest is, but we'd sure like to have a Sunshine Coast Archives that they could all contribute to. Item 12, thank you for the reports from all of council and from the SCRD director on our behalf. Items 12.1, items for release of closed meetings, and so can I have somebody move the recommendation on page 128 of our agenda to release the appointments to the Advisory Planning Commission? Councillor Shanks, Councillor Inkster, all those in favor? That's carried. And just so we know, Paul Mears reappointed for a 2-year term. Aaron Bickler appointed for a 2-year term. Scott Davies, we'll learn very quickly that he also resigned because he's going to be serving in the Gibsons APC. Anna Sandrin appointed for 2 years, and Sandra Friedman appointed for 2 years. And yes, Okay. And moving then to council correspondence, motion to receive the correspondence, Councillor Lutz, Councillor Inkster, all those in favor. Any of those we'd like to pull out? I'd like to see item 9, the letter from Judy Skogstad, item 11, the letter from on Polly Way, and item 12, the email from the SDBA regarding the Sechelt sign bylaw, all referred to staff, so we know they're actually followed up on those three. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Inkster, all of those in favor of those three? Any others that people would like to make sure are addressed? We've got a couple on the BIA. We're dealing with the derelict boats. And I think I appreciate the work from Kathy Peters, who I think lives in Nanaimo, who's, since we've been elected, sending us information on child and youth exploitation. But at the moment, I think it's based for information. Just let people flip through that to see if there's anything else they'd like to address. Okay, seeing none, I will then look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Inkster, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? That's carried. We're adjourned. It's not even 8:30. Pam, welcome. Yes, started with Wilson Creek.